It was a quiet morning, just like any other, when something happened that would shake the very core of a peaceful town. An elderly man, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped from his coffee mug, found himself at the center of an incident he could never have imagined. It all began when a group of rowdy bikers, cruising into the local diner, took it upon themselves to make fun of the man. They were loud, brash, and carefree, completely unaware of the storm they were about to stir up. The elderly man, sitting in the corner booth, didn't seem like much at first glance. His worn-out jacket, slightly wrinkled shirt, and gray hair made him blend in with the crowd. But there was something beneath the surface, something far deeper than anyone could see. Little did they know, the man they were about to torment had lived a life few could fathom. A life filled with stories of heroism, sacrifice, and untold pain. And he wasn't the type to let their cruelty slide. The bikers, on the other hand, didn't care about the man's past. They didn't care who he was or what he had gone through. All they saw was an easy target for their childish games. The insults started small, just a comment here and there about his age, his appearance, and his slow, deliberate movements. But then things escalated. They began to humiliate him, laughing as they taunted the elderly man. One of the bikers, with a grin that could freeze you in your tracks, grabbed the old man's coffee cup and, without a second thought, spat into it. They all laughed harder, mocking him with every word. It wasn't just a prank, it was an attack on his dignity. The old man sat there, eyes downcast, his face betraying nothing of the storm of emotions raging inside him. How could they do this? How could they show such blatant disrespect? He had seen violence before. He had witnessed the horrors of war up close, but nothing could prepare him for this. The bikers were so oblivious to the pain they were causing, so unaware of the man they were humiliating. They saw him as nothing more than a vulnerable, helpless target, an easy victim of their jokes. But there was something these bikers didn't know. Something that, if they had, would have made them think twice. The elderly man sitting in that diner wasn't just some fragile old man. He wasn't someone to be disrespected or taken lightly. No, this man had lived through the unthinkable. He had fought in the Vietnam War, survived battles that many could not even comprehend, and endured things that would break most people. His hands, though trembling now from age, had once held a weapon in defense of his country. His heart, though weighed down with the years, had once beat with the adrenaline of a soldier in combat. He had faced death, fear, and unimaginable hardship, and had emerged from it all with scars that told a story no one in that diner could ever truly understand. As the bikers continued their cruel laughter, the elderly man stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. He wasn't angry. No, there was something much more powerful than anger in his eyes. There was resolve. A quiet strength that only comes from someone who has seen it all and knows the true cost of life. The bikers didn't know it, but they were about to learn something that would change the way they saw the world, and maybe even themselves. But just as the tension began to rise, a sudden shift occurred. The air around them seemed to freeze. The man's eyes locked with the biker who had spat into his coffee. The biker, caught off guard by the intensity of the old man's gaze, faltered for a moment. There was no laughter now, just an eerie silence as everyone in the diner began to sense that something bigger than this moment was unfolding. What happened next was something no one expected. The bikers, once so confident in their ridicule, found themselves on the receiving end of something they hadn't anticipated, a lesson they would never forget. The elderly man, with a calm that was almost unsettling, spoke a few quiet words. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of 1,000 experiences. It wasn't just the words that made an impact, but the truth behind them. The bikers, still in shock, struggled to comprehend what had just transpired. The old man, once the target of their jokes, now stood before them as a symbol of something far greater than they could ever hope to be. The power dynamic had shifted, and now, in that small diner, a very different kind of respect began to form in the hearts of those who had mocked him. But what was it that changed everything in that instant? What had the man said? And how would the bikers respond to the man they had so callously disrespected? The answers would come soon enough. But for now, all anyone could do was wait and watch as the story unfolded, one moment at a time. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The shocking twist is just beginning, and it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about respect, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. What happens next will make you rethink the very meaning of strength and resilience. The room was thick with tension. The elderly man's words had cut through the air like a blade, leaving the group of bikers stunned. They weren't sure how to react, unsure whether the old man was about to unleash some hidden fury, or if they had just encountered something they couldn't quite grasp. Their laughter had died down, replaced by a heavy silence that felt like an oppressive fog. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. They didn't know what to do next. The biker who had spit in the coffee, the one with the cocky grin, took a step back. He was used to being the tough guy, the one everyone feared or respected. His leather jacket, emblazoned with patches from different chapters, marked him as a leader among his crew. He was the one who usually made the rules, who called the shots. But now, as he looked into the old man's eyes, he felt a shift, a strange feeling he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't fear exactly, but something much deeper. Something humbling. The old man, still standing tall despite his frailty, didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence alone seemed to demand attention, and it was enough to rattle even the most hardened of souls. The bikers who had come into the diner ready to make a joke out of an old man now found themselves questioning their actions. What had they done? They weren't the type to show guilt, but something inside them was beginning to stir, an uncomfortable realization that maybe they had crossed a line. It wasn't just the fact that they had humiliated an elderly man. It was the feeling that they had done something much worse. They had disrespected a person, a human being, who deserved dignity and respect. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut, and the weight of their actions hung in the air, unbearable. As the minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity, the old man slowly lowered himself back into the booth. He didn't need to say anything more. The tension in the diner was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. The bikers, now visibly uncomfortable, exchanged glances, unsure of how to salvage their bravado. But they couldn't shake the image of the man's face, the quiet resolve in his eyes that spoke of a life well lived, a life filled with hardships and triumphs that none of them could even begin to understand. One of the younger bikers, sitting toward the back of the group, nervously cleared his throat. "Hey up, old man," he said, his voice wavering slightly. The rest of the bikers fell silent. "We didn't mean nothing by it. We were just having some fun." His words were weak, lacking the usual cockiness they all wore like a shield. The old man didn't respond immediately. He just stared down at the table, his hands resting gently on the edge of his cup. The quiet was almost unbearable, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. It was as if time had stopped, and nothing else in the world mattered but the confrontation happening in that small, unassuming diner. But then, without warning, the old man slowly raised his head and spoke in a voice that was calm, yet carried an undeniable force. "Fun," he said, the word hanging in the air. "You think that's what this was? You think you can make fun of someone and call it fun?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "What you did wasn't fun. It was disrespect. And disrespect isn't something you get to take back when you realize you've gone too far. The bikers shifted uncomfortably, none of them quite knowing how to respond. They weren't used to being confronted in this way, especially not by someone they had dismissed as weak or frail. They had underestimated him, not just as an individual, but as a person with a story, a person who had lived a life full of lessons they couldn't even begin to understand. The room was quiet again, and for the first time, the bikers found themselves on the defensive. They had no comeback, no witty retort. The old man's words had struck a chord, one they couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about the coffee. It wasn't just about their cruel prank. It was about something deeper, something they had never stopped to consider before. At that moment, the diner door creaked open, and a few other patrons walked in, unaware of the tension that had taken over the space. The arrival of more people added an extra layer of discomfort, but it also gave the bikers an excuse to shift their attention elsewhere. They stood up, ready to leave, the group's leader, still grappling with the awkwardness of the situation, motioned for his crew to follow. But as they made their way toward the door, the old man spoke one last time, his voice clear and unwavering. "You might think you've won today," he said. "But there are some battles you can't win. Not by picking on people weaker than you. Not by laughing at someone's pain." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. "I fought a war that most people will never understand. And I've seen things that would make your worst nightmares seem like a dream. So don't you ever think you can walk out of here with your heads held high. You've lost something today, something you'll never get back." The bikers, now fully aware of the weight of the old man's words, hesitated at the door. They had come in looking for a fight, but what they were walking away with wasn't something they had bargained for. They had humiliated someone, and in doing so, had learned that there was a price to pay for such actions. As the door closed behind them, the diner returned to its usual calm, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The patrons, who had been quiet observers of the whole ordeal, slowly started to speak again, their whispers carrying the weight of the moment. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had the power to change people, to make them rethink their actions, and to inspire them to do better. But the old man, who had been the catalyst for this shift, remained seated, his coffee now forgotten. His eyes were distant, lost in a memory that had resurfaced with the biker's words. What had happened in that diner was only a small part of a much bigger story, one that was far from over. The lesson had been delivered, but the true impact of it, of his courage, his strength, and his unwavering sense of self, would only fully be felt in the days to come. The silence that followed the biker's departure lingered in the diner like a heavy fog. The old man remained seated, his eyes lost in thought, as the quiet murmurs of the other patrons slowly began to fill the space. The moment felt like a pause in time, a brief break between chapters, a moment of reflection before the next part of the story unfolded. But what no one could see was the toll it had taken on him. The old man, though calm on the outside, was grappling with a rush of memories, the weight of which could have brought him to his knees. His time in Vietnam had shaped him in ways that still echoed in his soul, and the disrespect he had faced that morning brought those old scars back to the surface. He wasn't angry, not in the way people would expect, but rather there was a quiet sadness that hung over him. He had fought so hard for freedom, for dignity, only to see it trampled by the ignorance and arrogance of youth. Yet as he sat there, he couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. The bikers had left, not just defeated in their mockery, but with something changed inside them. A seed of awareness had been planted, whether they realized it or not. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. A few days later, the diner saw an unexpected turn. The group of bikers, the same ones who had humiliated the old man, walked back through the door. This time, they weren't laughing. There was no cocky swagger, no arrogance. They were different. The leader, the one who had spat in the coffee, stepped forward. He hesitated for just a moment before meeting the old man's eyes, a sense of regret and humility in his gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What we did, that wasn't right. We didn't know who you were, or what you'd been through. We were just idiots, thinking we could get a rise out of you." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "We didn't realize the kind of man we were messing with. I spent the last couple of days thinking about it, and I had to come back and say I'm sorry." The old man, though still deeply affected by the encounter, studied the biker leader for a long moment. He had heard apologies before, some of them more heartfelt than others. But there was something about the sincerity in this man's eyes that told him this was different. This wasn't just an apology. It was an admission, a recognition of a greater truth. "You don't owe me anything," the old man replied softly. "You owe yourself. And maybe, just maybe, you owe the people who have given everything for this country, who fought battles so you didn't have to." The bikers, all gathered now in quiet acknowledgement, nodded, each of them processing the old man's words in their own way. The group had come in with their heads down, seeking redemption, but now they were facing something far more significant than just the old man's forgiveness. They were confronting their own actions, the reality of how their careless behavior had affected another human being. As they stood there in the diner, something remarkable happened. The bikers, once defined by their defiance and bravado, had begun to reflect on the deeper lessons of life. It wasn't about the apology. It wasn't about looking for absolution. It was about understanding, truly understanding, the importance of respect and empathy. The bikers left that day forever changed, their arrogance replaced with a newfound awareness of the strength in humility and the value of honoring others. For the old man, the encounter with the bikers was a reminder of the journey he had walked. It was a journey filled with scars, physical, emotional, and psychological. Yet it was also a journey of resilience, of standing tall in the face of adversity, and of knowing when to speak up and when to stand in silence. That morning at the diner, he hadn't just won a battle for his own dignity. He had ignited something in the bikers that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the old man walked out of the diner that day, he knew something had shifted, not just in him, but in the world around him. People had been made aware of the cost of their actions, and perhaps, just perhaps, they would think twice before making the same mistakes again. There would always be struggles, always challenges to face, but in the end, it was the quiet strength, the understanding of one another's journeys, that would make the difference. The story had come full circle, the lesson learned. And for those who were paying attention, the old man had reminded them all of something essential: that no one is ever too small, too weak, or too forgotten to make an impact. Sometimes it just takes one person, one voice, to remind the world what truly matters. As the door closed behind him, the old man glanced back at the diner, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. His battle, like so many before it, had been fought and won. And in his heart, he knew that the next generation, whether they realized it or not, would carry the lessons he had taught them. The story had ended, but its impact would continue to ripple through the lives of those who had witnessed it.